What if one of America's most groundbreaking films disappeared for 33 years because distributors couldn't imagine black people like its characters existed? From tragic death coincidences to lost soundtracks and a daughter's $25,000 rescue mission, Losing Ground's journey from obscurity to the National Film Registry is stranger than fiction itself. Fact 1. 3 deaths within 9 months. The cast and crew of Losing Ground experienced a tragic series of losses that still haunts film historians today. Director Kathleen Collins died of breast cancer in September 1988 at just 46 years old, but the heartbreak didn't end there. Star Dwayne Jones, who played the charismatic Duke Richards in the film, passed away from cardiac arrest in July 1988 at age 51, just 2 months before Collins. Then, in April 1989, Bill Gunn, who portrayed the passionate painter Victor Rogers, died from encephalitis caused by complications from AIDS at age 54. Within a span of only 9 months, all 3 key creative forces behind this groundbreaking film were gone. The timing was particularly cruel because it happened just as independent black cinema was beginning to gain mainstream attention with films like Spike Lee's Do the Right Thing. Collins had secretly battled breast cancer while working on her plays and writing projects throughout the 1980s, never living to see her masterpiece gain the recognition it deserved. Jones had spent his final years as a theater director and professor at the State University of New York at Old Westbury, while Gunn continued writing and directing experimental works. Their collective loss robbed the film world of 3 visionary artists who had fought to tell authentic black stories during a time when Hollywood had little interest in such narratives, and it left Losing Ground as a haunting final collaboration between artists who would never know how profoundly their work would eventually impact cinema history. Fact 2. Distributors rejected it for being too normal. When Kathleen Collins tried to secure distribution for Losing Ground after its festival screenings, she faced rejection for one of the most bizarre reasons imaginable: her black characters were too educated and well-adjusted. During a screening for potential distributors, white executives approached the people working to get the film distributed and told them bluntly that they didn't know any black people like the ones shown in the movie, and they couldn't understand where the racial angle was in the story. Collins later recounted this experience during a 1984 masterclass at Howard University, expressing her frustration with how the film industry simply could not comprehend a story about black intellectuals living complex, nuanced lives. The distributors had been conditioned by years of blaxploitation films featuring pimps, drug dealers, and stereotypical characters, and when presented with a philosophy professor researching ecstatic experiences and an abstract painter exploring his creative vision, they literally could not see a market for it. Collins firmly rejected their narrow interpretations, insisting that the film had many racial angles, but that its premise was revolutionary precisely because it refused to mythologize black life or deny black people the right to explore their experiences as normal human experiences. This rejection wasn't just about one film. It represented how deeply Hollywood's racism was embedded in the assumption that black stories only mattered when they reinforced existing stereotypes or served as obvious social commentary, making it impossible for authentic portrayals of middle-class black intellectuals to find an audience. Fact 3. First feature by black woman. Since the 1920s, Losing Ground shattered a barrier that had stood for more than 6 decades when it became the first feature-length drama directed by an African-American woman since the silent film era of the 1920s. This staggering gap in representation meant that an entire generation of black women filmmakers had been completely locked out of directing narrative feature films in America. The last time a black woman had directed a feature-length drama was during the era of race films, when movies were made specifically for segregated black audiences and shown in black-only theaters. After that brief window closed, the combination of racism and sexism in Hollywood created an impenetrable wall that lasted until Collins broke through with her 1982 film. What makes this achievement even more remarkable is that Collins accomplished it entirely outside the studio system, financing the film through grants and donations while teaching full-time as a professor at City College of New York. She didn't have industry connections or major backing, just talent, determination, and a crew of dedicated students and collaborators who believed in her vision. The film paved the way for Julie Dash's Daughters of the Dust in 1991, which became the first feature-length narrative film by a black woman to receive general theatrical release in the United States. Collins's breakthrough proved that black women could direct sophisticated, artistically ambitious films. But the fact that it took over 60 years for someone to even get the chance remains a damning indictment of Hollywood's systemic exclusion practices. Fact 4. Collins was arrested twice as a civil rights activist. Before Kathleen Collins became a filmmaker, she risked her life fighting for voting rights in one of the most dangerous regions of the segregated South. In 1962, after two leaders from the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee visited her campus at Skidmore College, Collins traveled to Georgia to work with the Albany movement, canvassing door-to-door in Terrell County to help black residents register to vote. She was arrested twice during this period, once for refusing to stop praying with 6 others on the steps of City Hall. The conditions she endured in jail were deliberately brutal. Her first 2 days were spent in the Albany jail, where the women's cell overlooked an open latrine. Ventilation was poor, and 10 women were crammed into a space meant to hold only 4 people. The place was crawling with vermin, and meals consisted of 1 fried egg, black-eyed peas, cornbread, and water. Prisoners were allowed no books and spent their time singing freedom songs, praying, and teaching other inmates about civil rights. The day after Collins and others spoke at Mount Olive Church in Terrell County, white supremacists burned the church to the ground in retaliation. She was later transferred to the Leesburg Stockade, located about 11 miles from Albany. When Collins returned to Jersey City in September 1962, she spoke to an overflowing crowd of 700 people at Mount Pisgah AME Church, urging them to reject hatred and love those who oppress them because of their faith in God, breaking down segregation's walls. Fact 5. The sound had to be completely re-recorded. When Nina Collins found her mother's original film negatives and began the restoration process in the early 2000s, she discovered a devastating technical problem that nearly derailed the entire project. The track negative, which contained all the film's audio, had deteriorated so badly over the decades that it yielded terrible sound quality that was essentially unusable for any kind of proper release. This meant that simply cleaning up the existing audio wasn't going to be enough. The entire soundtrack needed to be re-recorded and cleaned from scratch, a massive and expensive undertaking. Dennis Doros and Amy Heller from Milestone Films, who specialized in restoring overlooked independent films, took on the challenge of having the track completely re-recorded and restored by audio mechanics. Even with this intensive work, some problems remained unsolvable, particularly the sync issues in the film's opening scene, where the audio doesn't quite match the actors' mouth movements. These technical issues still await the day when the original magnetic tracks are found, which might be lost forever. The poor sound quality is one reason why some viewers notice that the film has an amateurish feel in certain scenes, with dialogue that sounds like it was looped in post-production rather than recorded cleanly on set. Despite these limitations, the restoration team managed to create a version that preserved Collins's artistic vision while making the film watchable for contemporary audiences, though it remains a reminder of how low-budget independent films from the early 1980s often struggled with technical resources that bigger productions took for granted. Fact 6. It cost $125,000 and started with only $25,000. Kathleen Collins began production on Losing Ground with a budget that most Hollywood productions would consider laughably small, just $25,000 of the eventual $125,000 total cost. This meant she essentially started filming before she had even half the money she needed to complete the project, a risky gamble that required enormous faith in her ability to secure additional funding as production continued. Collins pieced together the remaining money through a combination of foundation grants, including support from the American Film Institute and the National Endowment for the Arts, plus a German television program that provided funding for minority filmmakers. She also relied on small individual donations from people who believed in the project. This hand-to-mouth financing approach meant that Collins had to be incredibly resourceful and efficient with every shot. And it likely contributed to some of the production challenges visible in the final film. The budget was so tight that she worked with a crew of 22 students she had taught at City College of New York, many of whom were learning on the job. Despite these financial constraints, Collins managed to create a visually sophisticated film that looked far more expensive than its actual budget would suggest, using natural lighting, careful composition, and the talents of experienced actors like Bill Gunn and Dwayne Jones to elevate the material. The fact that she completed a feature-length film at all under these circumstances is remarkable, and it stands as a testament to what independent filmmakers could achieve outside the studio system when they had creative vision and a committed team willing to work for art rather than money. Fact 7. 2 separate crews worked on the film. Anyone who watches the closing credits of Losing Ground carefully will notice something unusual that hints at significant behind-the-scenes drama or challenges during production. The credits explicitly list 2 completely different crews, one labeled First Week's Crew and another labeled Last 3 Weeks. This strange division suggests that something major happened during the initial week of filming that required Collins to essentially start over with an entirely new team. Film historians have speculated about what might have caused such a dramatic mid-production change, though the exact details remain unclear since Collins never publicly discussed what went wrong. It's possible that the first crew didn't work out due to technical issues, personality conflicts, or simply because they couldn't deliver the quality Collins needed for her vision. Another theory is that the first week was a sort of trial period with one group, and then Collins brought in her trusted City College students who had been trained in her approach to filmmaking. If the film was shot in chronological order, this would explain some of the tonal and visual inconsistencies that critics have noticed between the opening scenes and the rest of the movie. The first few minutes feel more stilted and awkward, with poorly looped dialogue and stiff performances, while the film becomes more relaxed and natural as it progresses. The 2-crew situation also adds another layer of difficulty to an already challenging low-budget production, making Collins's achievement in completing the film even more impressive, given that she had to navigate not just financial constraints, but also significant personnel changes during a critical early phase of filming. Fact 8. Daughter's $25,000 rescue saved the film. When Kathleen Collins died in 1988, she left behind a 19-year-old daughter named Nina, who was studying in Portugal when she got the devastating phone call that her mother's cancer had returned. Along with a younger brother and the grief of losing her mother, Nina inherited a trunk filled with all her mother's writings and the original camera negatives for Losing Ground. For years, Nina didn't know what to do with this massive archive of unpublished work and a film that almost nobody had seen. It wasn't until 2011 that writer and professor Terry Francis, who was then teaching at Yale, reached out to Nina about the possibility of restoring the film. Even then, Nina faced a difficult decision because restoration work is extremely expensive. She ultimately paid $25,000 from her own pocket to have the negatives digitized at DuArt, a film lab in New York, going through with the expense, primarily because she loved her mother and thought she should at least save the film for the family. Nina's modest expectation was that the restoration would result in a DVD they could keep as a family heirloom, nothing more ambitious than that. She had no idea that 3 years later, in 2015, a film festival at Lincoln Center focusing on independent films from the 80s would select Losing Ground as the opening film, sparking a complete critical reevaluation of her mother's work. The film went on to screen regularly in art houses, was added to the Criterion Collection for streaming, and eventually received a full 4K restoration in 2022. Without Nina's $25,000 investment made out of familial love rather than any expectation of cultural impact, one of the most important independent films of the 20th century would have been lost forever. Fact 9. Eric Romer was Collins's only cinematic influence. Kathleen Collins had an unusually specific artistic vision that was shaped almost entirely by one filmmaker from the French New Wave movement. She stated explicitly that Eric Rohmer was the only person who's ever influenced me cinematically, and remarkable claim for any director to make, given how most filmmakers cite multiple influences. Collins particularly admired Rohmer's respect for language and his assumption that audiences were intelligent enough to follow complex philosophical discussions, qualities that are evident throughout Losing Ground, where characters engage in lengthy conversations about existentialism, ecstatic experiences, and the nature of art. She specifically mentioned his film My Night at Maud's as influential for how it allowed characters to talk through moral and philosophical dilemmas rather than relying purely on visual storytelling. This Rohmer influence gives Losing Ground its distinctive European art house feel with long takes, naturalistic performances, and a narrative structure that prioritizes character development over plot mechanics. Film critics have noted that if the movie had been made in French with Rohmer's name attached, it likely would have been embraced immediately by critics and distributors who were comfortable with that style from European directors but couldn't accept it from a Black American woman. The irony is painful. Collins was creating the same kind of sophisticated, dialogue-driven character studies that earned Rohmer international acclaim. But because she was making them with Black actors discussing Black middle-class life in America, the film was dismissed as having no commercial appeal and rejected by distributors who couldn't see past their own prejudices. Fact 10. Stars from Night of the Living Dead and Ganja and Hess reunited Losing Ground, brought together two legendary actors who had previously collaborated on one of cult cinema's most celebrated vampire films 9 years earlier. Dwayne Jones, who had achieved iconic status playing Ben in George Romero's Night of the Living Dead in 1968, reunited with Bill Gunn, who had written, directed, and starred in the experimental horror film Ganja and Hess in 1973, where Jones played the lead role of Dr. Hess Green. That earlier film was a radical reimagining of vampire mythology that explored themes of addiction, Black identity, and cultural assimilation through a highly stylized, non-linear narrative that defied genre conventions. When Collins cast both men in Losing Ground, she was tapping into a rich history of Black independent cinema and bringing together two artists who understood the importance of creating complex, non-stereotypical Black characters on screen. Jones plays Duke Richards, a suave, out-of-work actor and former theologian who becomes romantically involved with the protagonist Sarah, while Gunn portrays Victor Rogers, Sarah's philandering artist husband, whose creative impulses conflict with his marriage. The chemistry and mutual respect between Jones and Gunn is palpable on screen, adding depth to scenes where their characters interact, particularly during a tense gathering at the country house, where Victor's jealousy over Duke's attention to Sarah creates uncomfortable confrontations. Both actors brought gravitas and authenticity to their roles, drawing on their experience, creating groundbreaking Black cinema to elevate Collins's intimate character study about marriage, creativity, and the search for ecstatic experience beyond the constraints of everyday life. Fact 11. Only one theatrical screening for 33 years, the exhibition history of Losing Ground reads like a tragedy of missed opportunities and systemic neglect that kept one of American cinema's hidden gems invisible for more than 3 decades. After its premiere in June 1982 at the Town Hall Theater in Irvington, New York, the film had exactly one theatrical screening in New York City, a Monday night showing on January 24, 1983, as part of the Museum of Modern Art's Cineprobe series. The New York Times acknowledged this screening with just 3 brief sentences in their Going Out guide, barely enough to tell readers the film existed. After that single MoMA screening, distributors showed no interest whatsoever, and Collins could only arrange non-theatrical screenings at a few colleges and film societies for audiences who were already familiar with her work. The film essentially disappeared from public view until 1987, when it received a one-time broadcast on WNET New York's independent focus on PBS, and then it vanished again completely. It remained lost until 2015, when Milestone Films restored it and Film Society of Lincoln Center programmed it as the opening film for their series about Black independent filmmakers in New York from 1968 to 1986. This 33-year gap meant that an entire generation of film students, critics, and audiences had no access to a groundbreaking work that should have been taught in film schools and celebrated in histories of American independent cinema. The long absence robbed Collins of any recognition during her lifetime and prevented the film from influencing other filmmakers who could have built on her innovations in depicting Black middle-class intellectual life on screen. Fact 12. Collins studied André Breton at the Sorbonne. Before Kathleen Collins became one of America's pioneering Black women filmmakers, she was a scholar of French literature and surrealist poetry studying at one of Europe's most prestigious universities. In 1965, she won a John Hay Whitney Scholarship to attend the Sorbonne in Paris, where she pursued graduate work in French literature and cinema. Her specific focus was André Breton, the founder of the Surrealist movement, whose manifestos and poetry explored the unconscious mind, dreams, and the liberation of human thought from rational constraints. Collins completed a master's degree in 1966, conducting doctoral-level research on Breton and the Surrealists while simultaneously developing her love for European cinema, particularly the French New Wave films that were revolutionizing narrative storytelling. This academic background profoundly shaped her approach to filmmaking, giving her a sophisticated theoretical framework for thinking about art, consciousness, and the search for transcendent experiences, themes that would become central to Losing Ground, where the protagonist Sarah researches ecstatic experiences and struggles to move beyond her rational, controlled approach to life. Collins's fluency in French and deep knowledge of European intellectual traditions also made her uniquely positioned to translate certain artistic sensibilities from European art cinema into an American independent film context, though this sophistication ultimately worked against her when distributors couldn't understand a Black woman making films influenced by French philosophy, rather than creating work that fit their narrow expectations of what Black cinema should look like. Fact 13. Film within a film based on Frankie and Johnny. One of the most distinctive elements of Losing Ground is the student film that Sarah agrees to act in after much pestering from an enthusiastic film student named George, who wears a monocle and pursues her relentlessly. This film within a film is a silent vaudevillian adaptation of the famous folk ballad Frankie and Johnny, which tells the story of a woman who shoots her unfaithful lover. George's version features elaborate dance sequences that include period-specific moves like the boogaloo, the shim-sham, and the jaywalk bump, all performed in bright, eclectic costumes that contrast sharply with the naturalistic style of the main narrative. Sarah plays the role of Frankie, the scorned woman, while Dwayne Jones's character Duke plays Johnny, her cheating partner. The film within a film serves as both a meta-commentary on Collins's own artistic project and a symbolic representation of Sarah's emotional journey. As Sarah researches the concept of ecstasy intellectually, she discovers it viscerally through performing this heightened, theatrical version of betrayal and revenge. Much of the student film involves walking around on the roof of a parking garage, leading Duke to joke about whether this qualifies as one of those avant-garde movies. The scenes where Sarah dances and acts opposite Duke allow her to explore passion and spontaneity in ways she cannot access in her controlled, academic life. And the violent conclusion of the Frankie and Johnny story mirrors the escalating tensions in her marriage as Victor's infidelities become impossible to ignore and her connection with Duke grows more intense. Fact 14. Collins may have inspired MLK's I Have a Dream. One of the most extraordinary claims about Kathleen Collins's activism involves her potential influence on the most famous speech in American civil rights history. In 2002, civil rights activist Ralph Allen recalled that he heard Collins use the specific phrase, "I have a dream," during a prayer service in 1962 when she was working with the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee in Georgia. This was several months before Martin Luther King Jr. first used the phrase in a speech in November of that year, and almost a year before his iconic I Have a Dream speech at the March on Washington in August 1963. Although there is no established definitive origin for the phrase that became synonymous with the civil rights movement, historians have identified three possible sources, and Collins is cited as one of them. The claim is plausible because Collins was deeply embedded in the Albany movement during the exact period when King was also present and actively involved, meaning they were operating in the same activist circles where ideas and rhetorical strategies were shared freely among organizers. Whether Collins actually originated the phrase or simply used it independently before King made it famous remains uncertain due to the lack of recorded documentation from those prayer services. But the fact that contemporary activists specifically remember her using those words suggests she may have contributed to the linguistic and spiritual vocabulary of the movement in ways that were never formally acknowledged. This potential connection adds another layer to Collins's already remarkable legacy as someone who fought for social justice, both through direct action and through the powerful words she spoke and later wrote. Fact 15, added to National Film Registry in 2020. In 2020, 38 years after its original release and 32 years after Kathleen Collins's death, Losing Ground finally received one of the highest honors American cinema can bestow. The Library of Congress selected the film for preservation in the National Film Registry, officially recognizing it as culturally, historically, or aesthetically significant and ensuring it would be protected for future generations. This designation puts Losing Ground in the same category as acknowledged masterpieces like Citizen Kane, Casablanca, and The Godfather, films that are considered essential to understanding American culture and cinema history. The selection was particularly meaningful because it represented a formal acknowledgement of how wrong the film industry had been to ignore Collins's work for so many decades. The National Film Registry specifically seeks out films that have been overlooked or undervalued, especially those by women and minority filmmakers whose contributions were dismissed during their lifetimes. By 2020, the restoration and reissue of Losing Ground had sparked widespread critical reevaluation, with major publications like The New Yorker declaring it one of the great rediscoveries of the 21st century, and critics arguing that if it had been widely screened in 1982, it would have fundamentally altered the trajectory of independent film history. The National Film Registry designation ensures that future film students and scholars will have access to this groundbreaking work and that Collins's vision of depicting Black intellectuals with complexity and nuance will be preserved as an essential part of America's cinematic heritage.